Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I must say I'm puzzled by what there is in the amendment to be concerned about, but perhaps that will become clear during the course of the debate. Mr. Speaker, I hope the debate will be respectful, that we will use moderate language and have even tempers, but equally importantly, I believe we should have an honest debate, and perhaps even a passionate debate, and face up to some inconvenient truths, because if we do not, we cannot command the respect for this debating chamber which we need from those looking in and for those amongst ourselves within the chamber. Excuse me. This is not a day to dwell endlessly on how far we have come. It's a day to front up to what has yet to be achieved, and there are some big-ticket issues on the to-do list, even though we have come a decent way on our journey. In 1998, I was a journalist reporting the Troubles, and not the only journalist supportive of the objective of the Belfast Agreement to bring about a political process that would offer peace, because for far too long, far too many journalists stood at the white tape waiting to tell the world the name of the man who had been murdered or whose jobs had been bombed out of existence. I could not tell you how many deaths I reported presenting Good Morning Ulster in the 1980s. Sometimes that took me deep into the human cost of the Troubles, reporting the impact of a murder by talking to a priest or a minister, a neighbour or work colleague, a close relative perhaps, who knew the deceased as a son, a father, a husband and a relative. These people speaking from the heart about the human cost. On other days, only politicians were available, and it seemed to me they simply blamed each other. Some mornings it was as if the politicians had forgotten that there was a body in the morgue. Such was the bitterness of the mudslinging. It seems to me we are back there again, mudslinging. It was the leaflets, it was the vote, it was a democratic vote, it was pure provocation. This debate, Mr. Speaker, is an opportunity to call time out on that and to reflect. The leaflets have been distributed, the vote's been taken, the consequences reveal that there are problems that we all have to deal with. 15 years ago, I reported the promise of the Belfast Agreement, a promise that better times lay ahead. Better times, better politics, as this chamber replaced direct rule, mutual respect for each other's identity and culture, and a peace dividend for an economy that had been relentlessly targeted and diminished and held back by a concerted terrorist campaign for 30 years. Well, let me be as clear as I was yesterday about the violence of the last 5 weeks. It is all wrong. It has done huge damage to our economy and to the public purse. But let us not rewrite history, Mr. Speaker. An IRA bomb could, and sometimes did, cost the economy tens of millions of pounds in a split second. And the continued threat of Republican violence means tens of millions more that could be spent UK-wide on poverty and on deprivation and dereliction is currently ring-fenced for anti-terrorist policing. I cannot imagine how I, as leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, can reach out to those Republican terrorists. My party brought forward an agreement that was put to referendum here and in the Republic and hugely endorsed. It was also rejected in spectacular fashion and murderous fashion by Republican terrorists in Omagh, and more recently by the murders of PSNI officers and soldiers and a prison officer. Leadership is the buzzword today. Well, my predecessor David Trimble showed leadership in 1998. He attended funeral masses in Buncrana in Donegal for 3 of the young victims of the Omagh bomb, dismissive of the personal discomfort potentially coming his way from the Orange Order. And let us not forget that earlier in that year, before the deal and the referendum, he stood shoulder to shoulder with Seamus Mallon, with whom he was to share the office of the First Minister, in Points Pass, to be with the community there in the wake of the murders of Philip Allen and Damien Traynor. So it's nothing new for those in the key offices of this devolved government to stand together to condemn murder and condemn violence. What would be new would be for some members to accept the little phrase the subclause in the middle section of our motion that condemns all acts of violence and intimidation against police officers, elected representatives, other members of society, home and property, at all times. At all times. That means there are no circumstances which justify violence, including the murder of police officers. It is an absolute, not a conditional statement. Mr. Speaker, I was shocked to watch the discussion on the late news on UTV last night, to hear Alex Maskey, a member of this House, state that if he lived in the Short Strand, he would be out throwing stones at the street protests. I condemn the violence visited upon the residents.
Order. A point of order for Mr. Maskey. Order.
And I welcome your ruling earlier on at the beginning of this session. And I listened to Mr. Nesbitt start off his comments about today is not about what happened yesterday or last week, but about what we do from here on in. But I would actually strongly advise Mr. Nesbitt not to misquote me in this chamber today. There is a transcript. There is a full transcript. There is a transcript available, as Mr. Nesbitt, as a former journalist, will know. Available. He should not misquote me in this chamber today.
Order. The member has it on the record. Order. Mr. Nesbitt. Order.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I am confident that I reflect the spirit of the words that I heard last night on UTV's late night news. I condemn the violence. I do not condone any violence. Mr. Maskey, if I understand him correctly, is concerned that somebody will get seriously hurt. So am I. He is calling for leadership. So do I. But we need to understand what sort of leadership is required. Is it to justify violence under any circumstances? Not in my book. It's not. Some unionists, Mr. Speaker, on the Lower Newtownards Road think leadership means me standing shoulder to shoulder with them on the streets. I think it means offering a path that takes them off the streets to a political place where they can have hope of delivery on the issues that concern them. Nobody needs to be injured to do that, just as nobody needed to die to get us where we are today in this chamber. Mr. Speaker, my party calls for a return to the spirit of the Belfast Agreement. I acknowledge the DUP have an amendment down to that part of our motion. We'll not down the ditch over that, as long as we get this opportunity to explain exactly what we mean by the spirit of the agreement. I've already made reference to perceived difficulties in delivery regarding politics, the economy, culture and identity. But there was another area where the Belfast Agreement was an unqualified success, and that is in regard to the constitutional question, which was settled in 1998 and endorsed by referendum. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. And the recent census does nothing to undermine that position. Only 1 in 4, just 1 in 4 people took the option in the census to describe themselves as Irish only. That is no basis on which to build a united Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and that means the Union flag is the flag of this country, and it's everybody's flag. Now, I don't expect the people of the Short Strand to start wrapping themselves in the Union Jack every time they set out from home. In fact, I'd like to see an end to some people who currently wrap themselves in the Union flag, the ones who throw stones and petrol bombs at the Short Strand and at the police. That does nothing to promote the values of Britishness that I cherish. The spirit of the Belfast Agreement also means that we in this House commit to tackle the big outstanding issues. And, Mr. Speaker, there are many. And if there is an opportunity coming out of the last 5 weeks, it is for us to face up to those challenges. Dealing with the past, reconciliation, building a truly shared future. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, we could do no better today than begin by seeing if we can agree a common definition of what we mean by these concepts. I debated, albeit briefly, dealing with the past with a former Republican member of this House in another place in Dublin, and it was immediately clear that we did not agree on the starting point for dealing with the past. He certainly didn't see it as starting in the late 1960s. He wanted to go back a considerable deal further. So when, and more importantly, for whose benefit, do we want to deal with the past? Is it for those most impacted by the violence, incident by incident, or is it to enable society to move forward? And what does reconciliation mean? Well, Sinn Féin have offered a vision recently. It's not my vision, Mr. Speaker, but the spirit of the Belfast Agreement says you don't stop there. You continue to negotiate. And what does a shared future mean? Well, for me, it's not the neutrality we see in Belfast city centre and the pubs that say no sports shirts. For me, it's about a sign that says Rangers and Celtic tops both welcome. It is about being more than simply bland. That, Mr. Speaker, is the spirit of the Belfast Agreement I would wish to revive.
Gregory Campbell.